Hi, my name is Henrik Håkansson, and I'm here to talk to you today about speed versus scalability in the context of people analytics. I'm the Senior Director of People Systems and People Analytics at Delivery Hero based in Germany. So, first of all, when we start talking about speed versus scalability, is a number of factors that I would like to cover. And the first one of these factors is the investment that you're willing to make. So when you start out building a people analytics function, it's really important that you have a vision. So you understand where you're trying to go. What is the end game for people analytics, or at least what's the first couple of years or months going to look like, so you know what direction you need to take. The second thing that's going to be important is also the infrastructure. What are you willing to invest in forms of infrastructure? There are a number of solutions that provide out-of-the-box tools for you to do people analytics, and there is also the option to go in and build everything from scratch. Now, when it comes to infrastructure, of course, this means that if you want to build yourself, this requires a lot more investment, a different kind of skill set, and that maybe leads more towards the scalability versus the speed, because to get something up and running, that might take a while, but it doesn't need necessarily mean it has to. Of course, data quality is also a very important factor, and not necessarily something that sits within people analytics, but rather something that people analytics requires to function well. Because if you start developing a lot of dashboards that have poor data quality, you're going to have a lack of trust, and it's really going to be difficult to grow the function and get buy-in for more investment, because the product or the quality of the products that you deliver are not necessarily so great. So finally, it comes down to also resourcing. What are you willing to invest in terms of resources? Is it going to be a small team of people, and then over time you'll see how it turns out, and then you grow if there is a need for it? Or are you putting a lot of focus on people analytics? I see more and more companies, of course, putting more and more effort into people analytics as it's becoming a very prominent feature of any HR or people function out there. So once you start understanding your investment, this is really also what's going to drive your direction towards speed versus scalability. There's a lot of things you can do very quickly with minimal impact on these different topics here, but it might not lead to a very scalable solution in the long term. So you need to keep in mind both aspects. So what is the impact then? So is this decision to invest and drive people analytics coming from the business, or is it something that's generated from sort of an internal need from the HR or people function? So the more business input or the more business driven this decision is, the easier it will most likely be to get the right kind of investment, because the impact you'll see is going to be much higher. And this is also coming back to what kind of expectations. Do you need a dashboard right now that tells you what the workforce is going to look like, or what your attrition is? Well, then speed is of the essence. And maybe just focusing on that tiny topic will allow you to focus very hard on the data quality and the infrastructure just to enable this. And then from there, once you start seeing the sort of the impression and what this product can deliver in terms of value, then the expectations will start growing, and then you need to maybe take a step back and start looking at the scalability of those products. Also, talking about the growth and the maturity of the function, you need to think about, where are you today? What kind of skills do you have, not just within the team, but also in the wider team who are going to use these tools? Because if you have a lack of data literacy or data numeracy, where people don't understand what you're putting out, then I can tell you that your journey is going to be a lot longer. And then necessarily just putting out speed or products through in a speedy way is not necessarily the right way to go. But then you might want to focus a little bit more on the fundamentals behind people analytics and drive in that way is more slow but scalable solution. So looking at the execution of implementing people analytics, now we start looking at the timelines. So again, coming back to the expectations of, do we need something right now? Do you have anything? And I would always argue that people analytics doesn't really start out being analytics. It starts out being more reporting. And reporting is something that most HCM systems or, basic kind of functionality that we have that we can output rather easily. So their speed is something that we can definitely achieve. But in the long term, does it help that everyone is building their own custom reports or customized solutions? Probably not. So again, having the timeline in place and understanding what the urgency is of building people analytics is going to be very important. And also coming back to the business, what's the involvement and who is the stakeholders who's pushing for this to happen? And finally, as I mentioned before, also around the infrastructure, you have the option of building versus buying. Personally, I do feel like building something on your own gives you a lot more control, but from experience, it also takes a lot longer to achieve something that can be really utilized on a larger scale, whereas buying might be a quicker solution and something that can help you ramp things up. And then you would even go back and consider, okay, maybe we build something on our own, or you use the buy segment to augment something that you're building in parallel. But again, it comes down to what kind of resources and infrastructure you intend to have in place. And then lastly, we also need to think about the future. What's the long-term strategy of your people analytics function and your HR people function in general? Because if people analytics is still going to be there, which I highly think it is, it's going to be imperative that you think about something that's going to benefit you and that you don't have to rebuild everything from scratch 6 months from now or 2 years from now, because it's going to be a massive effort the longer you go without a good foundation. And trust me from experience that this is not something you ideally want to go through. Again, you won't have all the answers right when you start out, but over time, it's really important that you see what's the goalpost, what's the end game where you want to get to. And of course, this also creates a lot of possibilities and challenges that you want to consider. So again, coming back to the left-hand side or here on the investments and the infrastructure, the resourcing. Do we have resources that are capable of building some of these things? And is it going to be harder or easier going forward in the future? And of course, I would say the more advanced you are, the more easy it is going to be to attract talent, because from what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing, it's rather hard to find really good people in the people analytics space, because it's still a relatively early stage and the demand is a lot higher than the supply. So building something that is both good for the business but also attractive for talents to work in is going to be a key factor when thinking about the speed versus scalability. Now, moving on, anyone who's seen my articles or other presentations know that I usually show this chart where we look at the overall value and growth chart of people analytics, because I think it paints a pretty good picture. You obviously always start with the raw data, whether that's in a spreadsheet or an HCM system. Somehow you have the data, but that doesn't mean that data is very good. So you need to start thinking about, okay, how do we go from here up to something that creates a lot of value for the business? And the first step is naturally to go to cleaning the data. And once we clean the data and have a good data quality, then we can start trusting the data in forms of standard and custom reports. And of course, cleaning the data doesn't mean you go and clean absolutely everything that you have. I would here highly recommend that you focus on a very specific area and limit yourself to focusing on what kind of initial reports you want. So for example, I mentioned workforce or attrition. Focus your efforts on those and the different data fields that matter to those reports, rather than trying to go all in and try to fix everything all at once. So once we have this, as I said, this is still just reporting. This is not really analytics, but we're slowly getting into the analytics space, which means we start visualizing the data. You start seeing trending data. You build dashboards and create self-service for people to access themselves. And all of this can be done relatively quickly. As I said, you can take the raw data, clean it for a very specific purpose, create a report, put that together into a dashboard. That doesn't have to be very hard. But what if you deliver that product and then get another 5, 10, 15 questions on the data, and you realize that all of that you have to go back from the start and do it all over. So again, this is the trade-off you need to think about when it comes to to speed versus scalability. The speed is great to get buy-in and create the need for demand, whereas in the longer term, you need to start thinking about what is the scalability. If I want this to go to this level, because at this stage, you only know what has happened. But if we want to go beyond that and start understanding, okay, how can we do normalized metrics? How can we compare data across our business? How do we build dashboards that shows OKRs and things that everyone refers to as the metric to measure? But if you've all of a sudden built 3 different reports and have slightly different views of this, or you continuously develop more and more dashboards without a good scalable structure behind it, you're going to end up with a lot of confusion rather than clarity. So until we get to the OKR and the KPI stage of the dashboards, or however you want to visualize it, we will not be able to say why something happened. Because again, we're mostly just looking at reporting, and hopefully we can see the past, but we don't really understand anything beyond that. Next, we move on to sort of the machine learning and predictive analytics. And as I usually say, not every product that we build in people analytics needs to go this far. And especially when it comes to HR, it's rather sensitive what kind of data we can do predictive analytics on or put machine learning or AI to. But it does help us with understanding what's going to happen in the future. And then finally, of course, we want to be able to make sure that we drive results through analytics and understanding how we can make the best possible thing happen. But if you look at this and think of it from a speed to scalability point of view, that the further you go along this route, the more robust your foundations must be. So if you want it to be the scalable, it's going to be very hard to do it unless you have a good baseline. So then it might be worth spending a bit of extra time to achieve this, but you can definitely have some quick wins on the early stages of this growth chart. Now, before we wrap up, I also want to go into a little bit more around the drivers of looking back at what really impacts how you build a people analytics function. The first mention I have here is, or the first driver is global. And of course, not every company is global, but you can replace this with whatever fits your organization. The point is that it should encompass your organization. So you have a clear framework on how to work with people analytics. You're setting the same expectations everywhere. So you don't start having pockets of people doing this in their own way, because the more people that are involved, the harder it is to align on what is the metric we're looking at and how do we define the logic behind those metric. So if we can have the same architecture and capabilities, it's going to be a lot easier to align and also provide business, which means comparable data, etc., to our stakeholders. So once we have that in place, we can also start looking at the accessibility. So we want to make sure that people can easily access the data. And again, this is maybe more looking at a mature organization where initially we'll have to go through emails or some kind of direct messaging system that in the way that you share the data. But eventually you'll have an HCM system, you'll have some kind of tool to present the data through dashboards or reports. But the importance here is how you manage the access and give people the visibility of the data, and that to make sure that data is consistent between the different reports. And also to really here to understand your audience, that you need to build something that people can understand and don't overcomplicate things more than necessary. Continuity is, of course, very important to make sure that your data is always up to date. So coming back to the infrastructure that you want to build is that you want to understand if it's something that you can automate, because if you have continuous data that is based purely on people pulling a report and updating that manually every month, then that's not going to be a very scalable solution. It might be a lot quicker the first month or 2 or 3, but in the long run, it's just going to be a pain to keep updating this information. So the continuous data will eventually enable you to take actions based on historical data. So going back to the previous graph, we could see this is where we understand the what and eventually the why as well. But to get to this stage, we need to spend quite a bit of effort on the back end to be really efficient. And then, of course, I mean, people analytics doesn't really exist unless it's for the business, because we can always build the most interesting and cool dashboards and products in the world. So we need to focus on the business value and the need of the organization, and then also on the maturity of the business and the people function will matter a lot if people can digest and sort of take in the data and the products that you're delivering for them. And then finally, also making sure that you have ongoing discussions and with your stakeholders and matching them to OKR so you actually make an impact on the organization. Moving on, we also have the comparable data. I did mention this before, that we want to standardize metrics. So again, if you're just building for speed, it's very likely that you'll end up with a lot of dashboards that show the same metrics but have different logic behind them or different calculations, which is really not going to help your cause for building or growing your function, because people will not trust your data, which means they will also not adopt and want to invest further in your organization and your capabilities. So creating a data model that allows for consistent metrics across the business, or even creating a fundamental piece in the architecture that prevents people from doing all these ad hoc solutions or ad hoc logics that doesn't apply, but actually having a framework in place for all of the KPIs that you want to create. And then also ensuring that you set up a process for normalizing and adopting the new data. Then lastly, of course, we talked about it before, it's a topic close to my heart, which is the data quality. So data quality is generally quite difficult when it comes to people data, because it's very manual in many cases, and therefore you need a robust process for the data management, and you need a good relationship with the data owners and end users. And I can tell you, they will not see the value of maintaining all the data quality unless it's for legal reasons, until you give them a reason to, which means building a product that they want to use and sort of driving them to want to fix the data so that whatever KPIs they're looking at are accurate. So in the end, what is the conclusion? So when it comes to speed or scalability, is speed the most important? I would say in the beginning, yes, to understand and get some buy-in on what capabilities you can deliver as a people function or as a people analytics function. But when it comes in the long term, you really want a robust foundation that you can build scalable products on that are creating a lot more consistency, rather than having to jump back and forth between new solutions, and then you have 3 dashboards showing the same metrics, because from experience, that's going to be a very tedious and long journey to repair any kind of damage you have when people stop trusting your data. So in the end, I would say the result is really that it depends. In some cases, speed is more important, and in some cases, scalability will be more important. It really depends on the aim and the vision and the strategy that you have for your people analytics function. But I'm happy to discuss this more in the panel at People Analytics World, together with some great peers who will also have great insights to share. That's it for me. Thank you very much, and goodbye.